Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am back for my Week 4 LCK overview, analysis, and of course, at the end, my power rankings. This was a very fun Week 4 of LCK action. Not a ton of upsets, but definitely some more clarity as to where the standings lie, where some certain teams lie, where some teams may be overperforming, and where definitely some are underperforming. But before we jump into that, if you guys enjoy what I do, if you're excited for this video, please let me know down in the comment section below. Let me know what your series of the week was, which one you were most excited for going into it. I can have a gander as to which one that is for most of you, but, you know, which team you think is overperforming or underperforming the most, whatever you really want to talk about. You know I love chatting it up with you guys down in the comments, but I don't want to waste too much time. Let's go ahead and jump right into our first series here of day one, and that was Nongshim RedForce taking on KT Rolster. A 2-1 series win for KT. Nongshim continues their downward trajectory is the best way I can describe it. Really, they do not look good at all, but KT looks good in this one, and especially the bot lane. The bot lane's been up and down, I think, all year long. Liiv, I think, has actually looked pretty good for a lot of 2022, but aiming can sometimes be a little bit AFK in lane. He was really good this week, though, and especially in this series against Nongshim, he was really phenomenal. He's going to get player of the series. You could argue that this week, and we'll get to their series later in the week as well, but that this week in the LCK was aiming's best in the region, you know, since coming back over from the LPL. I think that's a totally valid thing to say because he was really, really good this week, and he finally found that team fighting form that I think a lot of people have been waiting for. Really, we know him as a team fighter. He's a team fighter. It's what he does. So, you know, you put him on the Aphelios, you put him on the Jinx, he's going to look pretty good. But really, it was the Ezreal game in Game 3 that was still pretty good. And then, honestly, the Game 2 on Aphelios is what everybody's going to talk about. But, yeah, I thought he played really well this series. Cuz still seems to be a little bit of a weakness for this roster. I'm not exactly sure if that's something that is going to continue forever. I really do enjoy the Gwen Sejuani flex that they kind of offer. I think that's something that more teams, in my opinion, should take advantage of. Both of them, I think, are very good in top lane, and both of them are serviceable in the jungle. I think you can get, you know, a little bit of an interesting matchup situation when it comes to flexing them because they're, you know, they beat different people in the top lane. I think you can do that, which they did in Game 1 here. Didn't work out for him. Nongshim was able to take that one, but certainly no fault of the draft, in my opinion. Just outside of that, I think Rascal continues to be a little bit of a question mark. This is a guy who had a phenomenal spring. His spring was easily, in my opinion, at least the best split of Rascal's career. And he has really struggled, I think, in summer to regain that form. Looking a lot more like Rascal before, not even just KT, but, you know, before the breakout, even if you want to talk about that. So, I don't know. Whatever's happening with him, I really hope he can get his momentum back on track. He's been on tank duty a lot more. And honestly, he's looked a lot more competent on the tanks. He plays the Gwen here in Game 1. Gets completely beaten up by Kana. Kana looked really good in Game 1. I don't know. Something's going on with Rascal. I can't tell you what. Vikla here in the mid lane. A bunch of games of Corki, sure. Him versus Arya, I think he gives you a little bit more upside than Arya does at this point. Not that Arya is a bad player, just, I don't know. Vikla seems like he's going to be a little bit more proactive than Arya was, who can sometimes just lose lane and then just kind of bleed out. But as for Nongshim, this team continues their downward struggle. Positives for this team do exist, mostly in the fact that their solo laners, I think, are starting to play better. Kana played really well in Game 1, like I said, on the Tryndamere. It's a pick that Kana's always really liked. We've seen it in solo queue for a long time. Not that he's brought it out on the stage a lot, but Tryndamere hasn't exactly been playable forever. I don't know. BDD is really starting to step up here as well. Loses another game of Azir. It's becoming a meme at this point, but BDD and Kana, I think, are definitely the bright spots of Nongshim. Everybody else, I think, is really, really struggling. This bot lane is bad. I'm at the point where I'm really starting to say that they are one of the worst bot lanes in the LCK. Obviously, it's hard to be the worst at anything with Fredit BRION and Hanwha Liiv in this region, but Ghost and Effort are certainly making a case for that. Effort's going to get my dud of the series, and ironically, I think it's one of his better series of the year. I still don't think it was great, but at the end of the day, I don't think they were, like, completely out of contention here. I really just think it was KT playing it better. Game 3 was theirs to win. This should have been a 2-1 series win for Nongshim, but they couldn't hold on. I'm not sure who exactly to blame that on. Honestly, it was KT playing really well, I think, in that latter half. But either way, like, just an interesting series here from Nongshim. This makes me a little bit more confident about them, weirdly enough, than I probably was like a week ago when they really were looking like they had no business being in the LCK or being hyped up nearly as much as they were. They at least looked competitive again in this one, and that's a plus. I think it's more than they've shown, and like I said, Soul Laner's kind of getting form back, I think, is definitely a good sign, but Dread needs to start stepping up to be what he was in spring, and Ghost and Effort need to figure something out. I mean, I'm at the point where Effort needs to be benched. Like, I don't really think that there is a reason to be playing Effort anymore, but, you know, what do I know? I'm not seeing scrims, so who knows? As for KT Rolster, they look good. I'm still not convinced that they're a top 6 team, but I think that they are doing the things that they need to do. If their bot lane can play like this all year long, I definitely think that raises their stake, but it seems to be coming at the cost of their top side, which was their power side in spring. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with KT Rolster, but they're going to be happy with the win nonetheless. Moving on to the second series here of day 1, we had a matchup between Kwangdong Freecs and Fredit BRION. Wow, this was a series. Sometimes, I think you guys know, I like to recommend games that are really fun to go back and rewatch in case you haven't seen them. And I'm kind of tempted to do that for game 2 here, because this, across every major region, might be the game where both teams wanted to lose most of any game I've watched in a long time. Wow, we'll get to game 2 in a bit. How do you lose that game if you're Fredit BRION? But KDF, let's talk about them. They certainly looked all right. Game 1 was fine. Moham seems to be in full time now for Hoyt. Moham seems to be in full time for him now, and it's definitely looking like an upgrade. Hoyt was a weak point for this team, along with Elim, for a lot of spring split. A big reason why they were underperforming early, and a big reason why they got back together was kind of a resurgence of that bottom lane. But if Moham can come in and be better than that, great. That's what you want to see. As for the rest of this team, really, this is off the backs of the same 2 people that have been carrying KDF all year long, King and Teddy. Keen and Teddy have been the focal points for this KDF team. Keen's gonna get my player of the series here for his game 2 on the Gwen, the team fighting late game. You could give this to Teddy, because theoretically, like, Teddy was doing way more than he should have, but that was because he put himself at such a deficit in game 2 on a pick that should be so strong. A really big ego pick here from Bro, which we'll get to. You know, KDF going Lucian Nami twice. It's like, okay, well, whatever. But Bro super ego picks it, goes to Felios, Lulu game 1. Of course gets obliterated because you're playing that in a Lucian Nami. You're never going to win that matchup. Ego's even harder to go Kog'Maw Lulu in game 2. KDF somehow loses that lane. I'm still not exactly sure how that happens. And then we'll get to what Bro does in the mid to late game later, but it's not like Teddy played the second game particularly well. He just was able to do a lot of damage on Lucian late, even after he went down early, which I don't know if that's more on him or if that's more on Fredit BRION. I don't know what to tell you, but Keen's gonna get my player of the series because he played all right. Fate has also kind of been improving. I think he's been getting better and better throughout the year. Fate was someone who I think a lot of people were really excited about going into 2022. He's been incredibly disappointing for me. Not as, like, he's been awful, just that he's not really been the impact that we wanted from him. We knew him as, like, this really good supportive mid laner that was good on the picks like Twisted Fate, Rise. You know, these things that could be a little bit more helpful towards the team, a little less lane focused. And yeah, he's been that. He's been more team focused, but it hasn't exactly been, like, him losing lane is a problem. Like, just because he's playing team focused champions doesn't mean that him constantly losing lane isn't an issue. So he was a lot better in this one. Again, a pick on the Rise. I get it. It's Fate's best champion, probably other than Twisted Fate, but it's still not great. It's really bad in the meta right now. I like the Swain a lot more in game 2 here. It gives you some, you know, not the best lane presence, but definitely some more flexibility with how to play the late game. And some more team fight presence just in general, which I think is just good in the meta right now. I still think Element, you know, is a little bit of a, I don't want to say a weakness, but not a strength. he was actually pretty good in game 1 here on the Trundle. It was the Wukong game I was more questionable on. Going into who is shown to be one of the worst junglers in the region, you would just hope that he could win this matchup a little bit harder, and he didn't. So, I don't know. KDF looks fine. Like I said, Keen and Teddy really are the focal points of KDF, and Keen looked good in this one, especially in that game 2 here on the Gwen and the team fighting late. And then Teddy looked good when he was allowed to look good, but he also kind of threw away his advantage in game 2. So, I don't really know what to take away there. KDF looked whatever. This series is more about Fredit BRION than I think it is about KDF. And I say that with the intention of, if you watched game 2, it is impossible for me to guess how this team lost late game. Because you are Gangplank, Poppy, Victor, Kog'Maw, Lulu, and you're up like a ton of gold. Your bot lane is super ahead, and you still can't win this series. Like, that is pathetic. Gammon in game 1 was whatever. I mean, he was pretty bad on the Aphelios, but that is such a giga bad matchup that it's really hard for me to know if he, like, this is the only game I've seen this guy play, and it was bad. So, I don't know. Like, it was a bad matchup. He was never given tools to be able to win this, so who knows? He looked bad, but like I said, horrible matchup. Game 2 was also a horrible matchup for Bro, but somehow Henna gets like a bajillion gold on him. This Kog'Maw is super duper accelerated by like 15 minutes. Lucian is so far behind. This game is over. Like, this game should be completely over. Kog'Maw is 1v5 territory, and Henna stands on the front line the entire game and just keeps dying over and over and over and over again in teamfights. I can't even begin to wonder what is going on in his brain. You could argue that this is somewhat on for not being able to frontline, but at the same time, like, Henna, your job is to not die. That's literally the only thing that you have to do in order to win this game, and he couldn't do it over and over and over again. So, yeah, the combine of this bot laners is going to get my dud of the series. Whether you wanted to give it to Gammon for game 1, where he was bad, or Henna for game 2, which he was really far ahead. He played really well early and just threw it away by continuously mispositioning late. I don't know. You can give it to whoever you want. This team looks atrocious. They look bad. Whatever positives this team had in spring, I feel like their confidence is so shot that it's all gone. Lava, who was really good for this team in spring, like underratedly good for this team in spring, has been nothing in summer. One of the worst players in the league in lane, in my opinion. has been a huge negative in the jungle. Their top lane situation is not positive or negative, and we just talked about what's happening in the bottom lane. I don't know what the plus side is for Fredit BRION right now. Like, they are so clearly the worst team in the LCK as of week 4. I can't imagine them winning more than 1 or 2 series in summer if they continue to play like this. Because they just have, they have no positive point at this map. Lava is going to have to get back to where he was playing, so does and that's really what you're going to have to rely on. But if that doesn't happen, they have really nothing going for them. As for KDF, bleh, like, sure, you beat Bro, but, like, did you deserve it? I mean, they crushed game 1, and at the end of the day, this losing game 2 would have at worst sent them to a game 3, but Bro's only won 1 game all year, you know, for it's not like losing to Bro would have been a good thing, so I don't know. KDF still looks meh. I'm glad they beat Bro. They're right in that cluster of, like, the 5 through 7 teams of KT Rolster, Liiv, SANDBOX, etc., right? But I don't know. This doesn't make me feel more confident about KDF, even though they won. Moving on to day 2 here. Our first series of day 2 is one of the more interesting ones of the entire week. It was DAMWON KIA taking on DRX. And DRX actually picks up the 2-1 series win, a huge win for a team that has been coming off of some questionable results so far this year, but certainly has the talent to be better than they are. They prove it here with a really, really good win over DAMWON that they absolutely needed. Their team actually played really well overall, but I have to give it to a lot of their secondary players in this one, or at least what I think a lot of people would consider their secondary carries in this one. Pioshik was phenomenal in this series. I make no secret about this on the channel. I've talked about it plenty of times. Everybody who's watched any of my DRX stuff knows. Pioshik's my favorite player in the world. This DRX team is one of my favorite teams in the world. And he proved why in this series, because, again, he proves to be one of the more instinctive late-game players, especially at the jungle position. anywhere in the world. A really phenomenal game 3 on the Poppy. Not only was his pathing nearly perfect in the early game that allowed DRX to get quite a bit of an advantage, but some really, really awesome plays late. The flash in front of Zika in order to take something to give Zika just enough time to press Zhonya's in that Swain ult form. I mean, that is impeccable. That's something that's a top play in the world. Like, the top players in the world make that play and no one else. And Pyosik made that play. That was really, really phenomenal. Not to say he didn't play well outside of that. His Trundle game in game 1 was really good. We're not going to talk too much about game 2, but it was fine. He was probably one of the more consistent members of that game 2. It's just, you know, game 2 kind of went wrong for them. But yeah, I mean, game 1 and game 3 was all DRX, and Pyosik played phenomenally in both. I want to give a huge shout out to Beryl as well, who had a great series here. Most especially his game 1 on a champion that I really do not like in Amumu. It's a champion I play a lot of in solo queue because it's a low elo stomper, but like, I don't know. I think it's a trap pick. Even with Kalista, where Kalista can throw it in for the ult, like at most, a lot of times Amumu ult can be very deceiving. I think you have to have a very good team in order to properly know when to utilize that Amumu ult, because that Amumu ult can really bait your team into going for fights that you just quite frankly don't or can't win. So this is how you play it. This is exactly how you engage. It's how you take advantage of Kalista early game. You're playing into an Ezreal Yuumi, who is a little bit of an annoying lane, very safe lane, but Kalista's still able to generate that lead and able to do a lot with it. And then late, you know, in game 3, you pick Lucian Nami. You dominate the laning phase over the Xayah Rakan, which in lane right now I just think is a little bit weak, but it's still alright. Lucian Nami's just going to be stronger. You're just going to be able to win that barrel. Played a really good game on the Nami in game 3 as well. But I also want to give a big shout out to Zika, who I think a lot of people haven't really been talking about on this DRX team. A player who I think has been pretty perennially underrated for quite a while, going back to his time on BLG. I think Zika is really good, and this game 3 on Swain really shows why. I know Swain's kind of a broken pick right now, but it really is one of those macro over micro, like, decision-making, right? I think his macro decisions and his map awareness really show why he is a top-class player, not so much his quote-unquote mechanics. And not to say he has bad mechanics or anything like that, but him and Pyosik have really started to form a nice duo here as jungle mid, a really nice synergy to play around the entire map together. Most of the time that's going to be through Deft, but still they play together really well. And Zika's really become unlocked, I think, in the last few weeks. Game 3 on the Swain, big reason, or a big example of that. Deft and Kingen were good. Deft was really good, especially in that game 3 on Lucian, but he had a lot of help. Kingen was fine. He didn't have to be much this series. Kind of got a little beat up in game 2, but we'll talk about that. Everybody did. Overall, DRX just looks really, really solid. This is a huge, huge win for them. They're going to be very excited about this. As for DAMWON, this is like the opposite of what you want to see. They got outclassed here, and not in the ways that you would have expected DAMWON to get outclassed. You're talking about a team that traditionally has had their top side be very strong, and just they hope and pray that their bot lane can hold up. But that was kind of the opposite in this series, where I think Dekdom and Kellen were definitely the strong points for DAMWON, even in that game 3 where you're playing the Xayah Rakan, like it's a weak lane compared to Lucian Nami. You were still able to hold up on that side of the map, whereas your top side just kind of fell apart. Showmaker's going to be my dud of the series here. I think this is one of the first ones I've given out to him in a while. Not because he's been perfect, but just because he usually isn't this much of a problem for DK, but he absolutely was. You could give the same kind of notion here to Nuguri, but he had a really good game 2 in their win, a much better game 2 than I think Showmaker had. And Canyon was also pretty heavily gapped here by Pyosik. Just not a lot of things that you expected to see in this series. A lot of your top players not performing up to expectation. What this means for DAMWON, I'm not exactly sure, because there is 2 ways you could take this, right? You could take this as, well, their good players were playing bad, so we shouldn't take this loss too seriously. Or you could start saying, all right, it's become a trend that some of their best players really aren't performing up to expectation. Maybe we're not at the level that we were at last year. I think you could realistically go in either direction. I'm definitely leaning towards the former. I think if Canyon, Showmaker, Nuguri can get back on track, this is still one of the best teams in the world. And I wouldn't take a loss like this too seriously, because you can't expect Canyon and Showmaker to play like this all year long. Even Nuguri, who, has definitely been slow to form coming back after not playing in spring. I still think that there is the upside to this team that almost nobody else in the LCK has. So I'm not pressing the panic button on DAMWON. However, for DRX, this is great. Like, this is exactly what you want to see. You want to see the team step up in a big series, and that's what they did here. This team has kind of struggled, I think, to maintain any level of consistency, so I'm not going to overreact to just one big win because, remember, this is a team that beat them in spring as well, but it is important to note that if DRX can really string together a bunch of consistent wins and get some confidence under this team's belt, like, talent-wise, they're one of the best teams in the world, and in this series, they showed why I consider them among that group and why I consider them closer to the top, 2 or 3 than I do to the bottom, 5 or 6. So, yeah, for DRX, this is about as good of a showing as you could possibly get. Moving on to the second series here of day 2, we had Hanwha Liiv Esports taking on Liiv SANDBOX, a battle of teams that I think people expected to be closer in standings than they actually are, but turns out LSB's pretty good, huh? They take the 2-1 series win here. They continue their hot streak that they've been on for a little bit now. Really, since the addition of Prince to this roster, it has completely changed how LSB is able to play the game, and they look a lot better, honestly. They look like a pseudo-good team in the LCK, which I just would not have expected going into the year, but they do look really, really good. Really, like I said, off of the back of Prince and Kale, really developing this phenomenal chemistry as a bot lane duo. They both played great in this series. You could give the player of the game or the player of the series to either. I think both would be relatively correct here, but I'm going to go with Kale at support. His Tahm Kench is maybe one of the best that I've seen in quite a while. His roaming and his map activity is pretty much unparalleled. He is everywhere on the map from ahead, and that's really good when you pick the Ezreal Tahm Kench, which is generally a pretty weak lane, but if you win into Kalista and Mumu, you're going to be able to do whatever you want. And that's exactly what happened in this series is they won pretty hard in that game 3, and Kale was just everywhere. Even in the game 2 that they won, he was also really phenomenal. You could say that was a little bit more on Prince for being really good on the Jinx, but still a good series overall from both of them. Prince has kind of come in and been one of the best AD carries in the world, or at least in the region, right? Like, it's the LCK. If you're one of the best AD carries in the LCK, you're probably one of the best in the world, and Prince has been, like, genuinely phenomenal since coming in. He's developed some synergy with Kale. It seems that Kale's been completely unlocked with Prince, and I don't know, this LSB team, turns out they're actually pretty good in a lot due to the bot lane. Kroko had a really good series as well. Like I said last week, this is somebody who we were really high on going into this season, obviously coming off of a Rookie of the Year that he won over Owner. He was pretty hyped up. Spring was a little disappointing for him, but he's bounced back pretty well in summer. He's been a big integral part of why this team has been able to take over maps so consistently and be able to play from ahead, which is what they've been really good at. Him and the bot lane, I think, are definitely the strong points of this team. If you have weak points, it's definitely the solo lanes. I don't think Dove is bad, but I certainly don't think he's a strong point. Closer has his ups and his downs. He's someone who I think could grow into being one of the better mid laners in the region, because he certainly has shown a good development, at least coming to Liiv, but he was really freaking bad in spring. Like, he's gotten a lot better, and it seems week by week he does get better, but he started off so poor, and he still has those performances where it's just like, man, you are not so good. And I don't want to, overvalue this series at all, in the sense of he is going into Karis. Karis being one of the worst mid laners in the region. Closer beating him isn't exactly like a, oh my god, I can't believe he did that, that's insane. I think it's good to show this level of ability to win, I should say. But I don't know. I'm not sold on Closer still being one of the potential top mid laners in the LCK. I think he's fine, but I still definitely have some question marks about him. Really, the optimism from this team just comes from how good this bot lane has been, especially Prince, who's been phenomenal, and Kroko's continued development into getting back into his 2021 form. As for Hanwha Liiv, this team's bad. Like, they're not Fredit BRION bad, but they're still bad. This bot lane's not good. SamD's gonna get my dud of the series here. He's been bad ever since coming over. He really is the kind of player that I think plays well for the first 10 minutes and then just, like, turns his brain off. Very similar to a few players we've talked about in the LPL. Much more of an LPL playstyle, which I guess makes sense for SAMD. But yeah, just, I don't know. Like, his team fighting is very, very poor. His positioning late game is poor. And I think you really showed that off in this series. A lot of deaths on Kog'Maw that don't need to be there. And then a really bad game on Kalista in Game 3. Really not much to talk about. Him and Vista don't have really any sort of synergy in the bot lane. I don't even think Vista's actually been that bad in terms of how he's played all year long. I just think his AD carry isn't very good, and they're not winning a lot of laning phases. And it's very difficult for them to transition that into any sort of prolonged success. Karis continues to disappoint as a mid laner. He continues to not really show a ton of upside. On Fleek is very hit or miss. He's very much an LCK jungler. He was really good in Game 1 here. Their win in Game 1 on the Wukong, he was actually pretty good. And then in Game 2, Game 3, he was just out-jungled by Krako. Not really the end of the world. Krako's a good jungler, but On Fleek continues to be probably one of the better members. And then this is one of Dudu's better series of the year as well on the Gnar. I'm getting a little bit worried. I know we know Gnar is his best pick and the pick that he's most comfortable on, but I mean, just ban it, like, at this point against them. I don't know if he is comfortable playing anything else, which is fine. I mean, you know, just ban the Gnar. Like, I know there are power picks in the meta right now, but you can definitely open up space for a Gnar ban, especially if they're going to leave it to second rotation like they did a couple times here. So just some things to note against Hanwha. They're a bad team. There's not really much to talk about. I still think that they're clearly better than Fredit BRION because they're just a complete disaster right now, but they're not, like, much better. And to me, they are clearly worse than the 8th best team. They're pretty handily slotted into that 9 slot, if you ask me. For Liiv SANDBOX, they're currently 3rd in standings. That's nuts. They're going to be very excited about that. I don't think they're quite the 3rd best team in the LCK, but somewhere around 5th, I think, is totally realistic for them. I mean, they beat DRX last week, so there's definitely some upside to this roster. If Prince can continue to grow, if you get more performances out of Closer and Krako and Kale, like, this might actually be a sneaky contender for a Worlds team. They're going to have to show that development, though, because right now, I'm just not sure they have enough firepower to break into that top 4. Jumping into day 3 here of week 4 LCK action, we finally get a look at the series I think a lot of people were most looking forward to going into this week. Of course, I am talking about Gen.G taking on T1, the 2 best teams in the region, I think pretty undisputably. And T1 is actually able to take the series here 2-1, continuing to show that they are the best team in the region. Amen. End of story. I know they lost last week to KDF. It didn't happen. I don't know what you're talking about. T1 is undefeated. They look really, really good here. I don't even know what they're feeding these players, but holy cow, was this series phenomenal for T1. They're cracked in so many different ways. Top jungle for this team is one of the best in the world. And if you would have told me that before the year, I would have been like, yeah, I can see them growing into it, but they're not there yet. Like, they're there. They are there. Zeus and Owner are gross good. Owner's gonna get my player of the series because holy shit, that kick in Game 3. Also, Game 2 was so good. The Viego game was so good from Owner. It's just really, this team is so hard to beat when they're playing like this because you have this lineup and you could genuinely argue that Faker is their worst player. And that is such a weird thing for me to be able to say because Owner's playing so good. Zeus was so good in that Game 3 on Gnar. Gnar with Yuumi is so disgusting to play into because he can just go in, obliterate them all with the damage buff, and then never die. Really, really scary, especially when you have a top laner like Zeus to be able to pull it off. And even when, like, Keria had a really good series here as well, obviously, like, shut up the Yuumi in Game 3. It was the most important pick in that game. It's hard for me to give him player of the series because it's Yuumi, but he was the most important player in the most important game. So, I mean, shout out Keria. He continues to show that he's one of, if not the, like, indisputable best support in the world. Guma wasn't even there for the final fight in Game 3. Like, that's the stunning part. Like, I know these games were a little slow, but it was a 4v5, no Gumayushi, and they still won it. That's how cracked this, like, Gnar Yuumi combo was. The Lee Sin kick was unbelievably good. Overall, just T1 looks awesome. They look like the best team in the world. I know they got trounced in MSA finals, but sure, like, you know, I still think this team is right there. I don't think that it's like LPL and then T1. I think it is, T1 is right up there. You know what I mean? Whatever you want to say, T1 still has to be considered one of the favorites to win Worlds. Gen.G is still a really good team. I don't want to take too much away from them in this loss. They are able to take the first game here, mostly off the back of Chovy just being really good on Azir. But they were a little bit outclassed, especially in Game 3 here. My dud of the series is going to go to Lehens. He has some picks that he looks really good on. Cough, cough, singed. But when he plays Tahm Kench, he just doesn't look like a top-tier support in the LCK. I don't know what the deal is with whether they just don't want to put him on that every game, or they don't think it'd be beneficial, or if they just want to pull it out against DAMWON. But Lehens has a very interesting champion pool, and I think they would be remiss not to utilize that more, because him on regular supports going into carry, he's just going to look like the worst support, which he was in this series. Not to say everybody on this team played well. Doran had a rough series into Zeus. Doran, the weak point of this Gen.G team, we've known that for a little bit. He was certainly the worst top laner here. And then Peanut kind of got a little gapped by Owner, especially in games 2 and 3. Owner just looked so good, and Peanut really wasn't able to do anything. The Wukong game was kind of meh. I don't know. Even in the Poppy game, like, it's his signature champion, and he had control of the map, but it was more of the Azir effort, in my opinion. Just, I don't know. This wasn't the Gen.G that you wanted to see show up against T1. This wasn't the super ultra hyper competitive series that I think you were hoping from Gen.G here, but it's not like they were awful. Like I said, Chovy looked really phenomenal in both games 1 and game 2. Shout out to the Azir in game 1, and then the Akali in game 2. He was very close to making that game competitive, basically by himself. Chovy is, like, clearly as good as he could possibly ever get. Like, it feels like every year we talk about Chovy being so good, and yet his team doesn't have the results to show it. His team is starting to generate the results, and honestly, a lot of it is because of him. Like, he is just so clearly, like, the best player in the region, in my opinion, that, I mean, just shout out Chovy. He couldn't carry his team to a win in this, but, you know, Gen.G's Gen.G. Just because they lost to T1 doesn't mean they're not the second best team in the region. You would have just hoped that they put up a little bit more of a competitive series, I think, in my opinion. But shout out to these two teams, two best teams in the region. T1 still looks like absolute world beaters. Hopefully they can continue that momentum for, I don't know, the rest of the year. World Finals, maybe. I'd love to see this team in the World Finals. They deserve it. And on this pace, like, they're going to reach it. Moving on to the second series here of Day 3, we had KDF, Kwangdong Freecs, taking on KT Rolster. A 2-1 series win for KDF that they're going to be happy to take here. Off of the back of their mid laner actually playing really well and really controlling the whole map here. This is what Fate does incredibly well. Is he, like I was talking about earlier in the week, he's kind of that, I don't want to say support player, right? Like supportive player, because that makes me sound bad, but more of that, like, for Western fans, kind of the Niski archetype, right? Of, doesn't need to be the focal point when it comes to damage in order to take over the map and be the focal point in terms of the pressure. I think is kind of what Fate, the best way to describe what Fate offers. He was really good in this series, especially in their wins, but, like, I mean, game 3 was Fate. I know you're going to look at the scorelines, you're going to say, Elm was really good in this series, but, man, Elm is really good when Fate is, like, there with him all the time and just kind of sacrifices his own lane to go and make plays across the map all the time. That's when Elm is good. Elm is not good in almost any other circumstance. He's been one of the worst junglers in the league. Luckily for him, he goes into another one of the worst junglers in the league in this one, but we'll get to them later. Fate was really the MVP here, and there's a reason he's the player of the series, but we can't take it all away from Elm. He had one of his better series of the year here against KT. Finally, a performance where he kind of gets a lot of gold and can do something with it. He's not usually ahead because he doesn't have a lot of very good early game macro, but Fate helped with that in this one and was able to get Elm ahead to the point where he could fight. Keen is also just, like, really good. The Fiora game was really fun to watch. He kind of got completely bodied in game 2 on the Gwen, which makes it kind of hard for me to think of him as, like, a great series, but his game 3 on the Fiora was good, and it was really good, and his game 1 on the Gnar was fine. As for Teddy and Moham, they didn't have to be much this series. They weren't the focal points, which was good. I think overall, moving away from having a system where you have to rely on your top laner or your bot laner to win, I think is positive for the team overall. Fate looking really, really good. Obviously, they still spent a lot of time bot lane because that's where Fate wanted to put his resources, but I think the pressure wasn't on bot lane because LM got so much gold in both games 1 and 3 that they were kind of able to fight without Teddy, which was good for the most part. Teddy kind of needs to be there for a lot of their fights in terms of how they've played so far in 2022, so to see a series where they don't rely on him, I think is a positive. As for KT, meh, like bleh, this looked bad. It's a bad look for them. Cuz is bad. There's no other way to put it. You could really make the argument that he's the worst jungler in the LCK. I feel like there's a few people that have been making that argument so far in 2022, but Cuz is definitely in that conversation. He has been really bad for KT. This team wins very much in spite of him. Aiming had a phenomenal series. I want to talk about him. He was really, really good. He was arguably one of the best players on both teams in this series. It just didn't particularly, and Liiv, for that matter, also played well, but I mean, Aiming in particular played great in all 3 games. I want to give a big shout out to him because he had a really good week, but it wasn't enough to carry KT to a win. Most of that was due to topside. Rascal, like I said, looked really good in game 2, like just kind of beat up on Keen in game 2, but games 1 and games 3 were not in Rascal's favor. He very much lost the matchup anytime he was like, I guess I'll pick Gwen. That very much does not seem like a pick that Rascal is comfortable on. I said that exact thing last split as well in one of these videos, so hopefully he gets the hint and he stops trying to play Gwen, because it seems every time he plays Gwen, he doesn't do too well. You could realistically have given Rascal the dud of the series here, but I think Cuz was a little bit just more impactful in terms of how he lost, so Cuz is going to get it. Like I said, it wasn't all doom and gloom, though, because the bot lane had some positives. The outlook for this team stays pretty much the same. You would have liked to see KT win this. That probably would have propelled them into the top 6 for me in terms of my power rankings, but losing to KDF is a little unfortunate. It probably is keeping them just outside of it. Not a ton of movement in my head, though, from where these two teams are at. I still think they're both relatively similar in terms of skill level. I think in this one, you just had a step-up performance from the weak link of KDF and LM, and I think that was probably the difference maker. If you don't have that, I think the series really could go either way. So I don't think these two teams are super far apart, but KDF is going to be very, very excited they were able to pull out the win in this one. Moving on to day 4 in week 4 here of the LCK. We kicked that off with Nongshim RedForce taking on Liiv SANDBOX, a 2-0 series win, a 2-0 series that really wasn't close. A nice win here from Liiv. Nongshim continues their fire sale down the standings of the LCK, but Liiv continues to shoot up, and I'm really happy to say that. This team really is fantastic, and I said it earlier in the week, I'll say it again. A lot of this is off the back of, oh boy, Prince is really, really good. Like, he's really, really good, isn't he? He's been one of the best AD carries in the region all year long, and in summer, he's, like, taken it to a new level. You could make the true argument that he is playing, like, the best player in the LCK right now. Like, he's definitely carrying his team, I think, more than anybody else, is single-handedly carrying their team in the LCK. You could make the argument for Chovy, obviously, but I don't know, Prince is a different kind of special for this Liiv SANDBOX team in terms of how much he means to them. At least Chovy has Peanut, right? And Lehens has had some good games, and Ruler is awesome. But, like, I don't know, Prince has been the lifeblood, the backbone of this Liiv SANDBOX team, and he continues to be that. Him and Kale have phenomenal synergy. Prince is my player of the series. I'm not sure if I said that. Him and Kale have phenomenal synergy. Kale has really come out of his shell ever since playing with Prince. These are two picks that I wouldn't consider generally phenomenal in the meta right now. Rel especially, I think, is relatively weak, but certainly did not look it in this series. Kalista is a good matchup in Lucian, and the Zeri Nautilus lane just beat Ghost and Effort, who are showing that they are one of the worst bot lanes in the LCK, but just overall a good performance from Liiv. Krako's back. Closer feels like he's really, really starting to finally come into his own. Like, this Liiv SANDBOX team is just clicking on all cylinders. Everything that you could have hoped for coming out of spring to happen, like in the best case scenario for Liiv SANDBOX, is currently happening for the team. You've got to be excited about that. I don't know if they're like a top team. Like I said earlier in the week, they still have some proving to do to show that they can beat teams like DAMWON or, T1 or Gen.G or anybody like that, right, to break into that. But man, like right now they're doing everything they can to position themselves to sit, to once they get there to prove that. They just have to win that game whenever it ends up happening. So, shout out to Liiv. They're doing everything they can. Nongshim is the opposite. They are falling and falling fast. This team's bad. There's no other way to put it. Dread's going to get my dud of the series here. He was not good. Really a not good Lee Sin game in game 1. Died a ton on the Wukong. Really couldn't get a lot done on the game 2 here. But you could also give this to the bot lane, who were bad. Ghost was bad. Here, he was worse than Effort, in my opinion. I don't know. Ghost he's really hard to judge at this point because he clearly has the worst support in the LCK. But also, it's not like he's himself playing very well. So I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Ghost is not doing well. Effort has been awful. I've talked about that plenty. Dread is having one of the worst starts to a split of his career. BDD can't win on his signature champion and Azir. Kana's fine, but, what are you going to do from top lane when the rest of your team's losing? So, yeah, Nongshim looks like as much of a disaster. In the same way that Liiv is this is the best case scenario you could have asked for coming into this split. This is the worst case you could have asked for from Nongshim coming into this split. I can't imagine a worse start for them. That was realistic. Their only 2 wins are against the 2 worst teams in the LCK that everybody can beat. They have not been able to beat anybody else, and it shows here as they get absolutely decimated by Liiv SANDBOX. Outlooks of these teams, Nongshim is clearly, bottom 3. I think they are clearly within that range at this point. Something has to give for this roster. Bot lane's got to change. Obviously, I'll talk about it here. They signed Snowflower, and it looks like he'll be coming in to be the starting support for this team. If he hasn't played in, a year plus, so I don't know what that truly means for Nongshim, but he can't be worse than what Effort has been. I think you also need a new bot laner. I'm not sure if that's going to be in your challengers or if you need to go find somebody, but I don't think Ghost and Effort is the answer, and I don't think just replacing Effort is the answer. I think both of them probably need to change, and then you just have to hope that Dread gets back on track, but yeah, I don't have a ton of hope for this Nongshim team for the rest of the split. As for Liiv SANDBOX, like I said, they're doing absolutely everything they can to push themselves in that upper echelon of teams. They are beating the bad ones. Now they just have to wait until they have an opportunity to prove it against the good ones. They did it last week against DRX. Hopefully they can do it against the rest of them. Moving on to the second series here of day 4, we had Hanwha Live Esports taking on DAMWON Kia. A 2-0 series win for DAMWON. It certainly was closer than I think the scoreline would tell you, though, especially that game 1. A very, very close game. Not exactly DAMWON's best, but they certainly have ups and downs here. Let's talk about the ups. The ups were how Canyon played in this series, in my opinion, which was generally pretty good. A good bounce-back series after him and Showmaker had a disappointing performance earlier in the week against DRX. I think they looked a lot more coherent, a lot better generally in this series than they did in that one, especially Canyon, who had a very good game 1 here on the Taliyah. Very much a reason that they were able to take control of that map and eventually end up winning it in the late game. Game 2 was a different story, though. That one was taken over by Dektum. He's actually allowed to play his Aphelios here in Game 2 instead of this Senna pick that just does not work for this roster. And shout out, because he gets to win, which, yay, Dektum gets to win the game, by himself, and I'm happy for him. And Canyon plays well in this one, too, on the Trundle. Showmaker has a good game on the Taliyah. It's a really good flexible pick for DAMWON, but yeah, honestly, I just think DAMWON looked a lot better in this. Nuguri's starting to come into form. This was probably his best series of summer so far into Dudu, who is, as we know, not one of the best top laners in the region, but certainly not someone who I would consider, if you're bad, you're going to destroy him every time, no matter, he's not Morgan from 2021, right? He's still fine. I just think this is a good sign from DAMWON in general. They were down at the beginning of game 1. Definitely something worth noting. Dektum has this funny little quirk of his where he's going to die in the 2v2 at least once per series when he absolutely has no business. Pulled his Ven, walking into a bush and just immediately getting blown up. So that's fun to watch, but not the best look for DK. And obviously, he bounces back. He has a really good game 2 here, but there are definitely some things that they still need to clean up. This isn't the cleanest performance that I've ever seen from DAMWON, really the best way I can describe them is as a very inconsistent good. They're inconsistent, but not in the same way that I would consider a team like DRX inconsistent. Like I said earlier, DRX is a team where if they can find that consistency and win series regularly, then they're going to be one of the best teams in the league. DAMWON can win series regularly, but they'll have one game in those series where it's just like, what are you doing? Or 15 minutes of gameplay where they just seem to lose their minds, especially this bot lane. And I don't really know what to do about that. It very much feels like any moment this team is like expected to blow up. They're always walking on a tightrope in terms of their macro and their mental. So hopefully they can, you know, clean up some of the edges. I think Canyon has done a lot to keep that team from blowing up and from being a huge negative. Showmaker as well, but you know, they have the talent to be one of the best teams in the world. We know that. Canyon, Showmaker, Nuguri is one of the best top sides ever. And then DAMWON and Kellen are great, right? As for Hanwha, they're a bad team. I talked about it earlier. They're not good. SamD's my dud of the series here. He's whatever. He's blah, blah. He's not good. I don't know what else to tell you. Him and Vista have no synergy. SamD, even when he gets leads like he did here in Game 1 on the Kalista, he's not able to keep them. I know you're going into Senatom Kench, which is just this infinitely scaling lane, but DAMWON and Kellen are notoriously awful at Senatom Kench, so I don't know. SamD just looks like he's completely outclassed here in the LCK. Him and Vista have no synergy. I would be looking to replace them with youngsters immediately because this team is not going to be winning this year. Nobody else on this team is really that good. Like I said, Dudu got kind of beaten up by Nuguri, but what are you going to do? You know, Hanwha just sucks. There's really not much else to say. I don't want to, you know, sit on it too much. There's really no reason to talk about this team too much. They're not very good, and they don't have a lot of synergy, and I hope they decide to make a change eventually. As for the outlooks, like, you know, Hanwha's 9th and DK is 3rd, or 4th, or wherever you want to put them, right? Like, they're in that conversation. DAMWON should still have Worlds aspirations, and they still should be a favorite for going to Worlds, even if, you know, they lost earlier this week. I think they have the talent to do so. It's all about, can they clean up these weird mistakes? If they can, I think that they could actually probably push, mechanically speaking, the top 2. But until they do that, I think they're going to be sitting closer to DRX than they are to Gen.G or T1. That's going to bring us to our final day of Week 4 LCK action. We kicked off Day 5 with a match between DRX and Gen.G, two teams we were actually just talking about in the DAMWON segment. And I can't say pretty clean, it's a very clean 2-0 series win here from Gen.G, who just look like the better team, and they are. There's really no other way to put it. Let's just talk about the obvious. Ruler's phenomenal. I got a lot of flack in preseason for calling Ruler, like, far and away the best AD carry in the LCK. A lot of people didn't like that opinion. They were like, oh, Guma's real good. Oh, Teddy can be really good. Even now I can see people be like, oh, look at Prince's mechanics. Ruler is far and away the best AD carry in the LCK. This is why. I mean, these two games on Lucian, these are the two best games of Lucian I've seen in years. I'm talking actual years. I've never seen Lucian be able to literally one-tap 2 people at the same time in the mid lane like he did in this series. A phenomenal one. Ruler's clearly my player of the series. He was great. He was great last week, too. He's been great all year long. He's been great for 5-6 years in a row now. Like, at what point do we just go, yeah, Ruler's like one of the best AD carries of all time. Period. End of story. Like, there's not a lot of AD carries in the world ever I would take over Ruler. And this is a big reason why. Not to say he was the only player who performed well. He was just the player who showed up the most. I thought Lehens had a good bounce back series after a rough one earlier in the week against T1. He looked good. Obviously, you know, Lucian Nami is really, really oppressive when you play it well. I've been saying that all split long. And I know people have been calling Lucian like a trap pick over in the Western regions, but clearly, like, this is what you want. Like, Lucian just gets to walk up into lane and actually one-tap people with Nami damage buffs. So, yeah, like, this is unbelievable. It's not even the DRX comp that I don't like. Like, I just think Gen.G played better. Chovy had a little bit of a down series. I think this was one of his weaker ones of the year. That's not to say it really mattered because Peanut and Lehens were really good facilitators for Ruler to carry. But just something worth noting. Chovy didn't have to carry in this one. Doran's fine. He was whatever in a Kingen. I mean, that's a matchup of whatever in the top lane. As for DRX, they were just outskilled. There's really no other way to put it. They didn't play particularly awful. Honestly, Game 1 was relatively close up until the end, and then Game 2 was fine. Game 1, they really had a chance to win. I think if Kog'Maw got super online. You had a good Protect the Kog'Maw comp here. You have this. I like the Seraphine mid a lot. And, you know, Lulu, Shyvana to dive in. If you maybe had an Ornn up in the top lane there, I would have liked it a little bit more. But, you know, still, the Dark Tech of Shyvana, you know, pulled out from Gen.G in the LPL, is fine from King in here. They had a chance to win that. They just couldn't pull it out. And then game 2, they just got outskilled. Not much to really talk about, honestly. They're just not as good as Gen.G. They didn't look awful. Nobody on this team actually looked awful. They just looked like they weren't on the same exact level. I think my dud of the series is going to go to Beryl. I think that's possible that you could give this to Chovy for that game 1 on Azir. I really do think that that is something that I considered here, but overall, I think Beryl was a little bit less consistent here. You want that Lulu in game 1 to really be the one that keeps the Kog'Maw alive, and you want everybody else to help with that, but that's Lulu's job primarily, and Deft was dying way too early, I think, in those fights. And then in game 2, the Renata just wasn't great. Getting one-tapped by Ruler, you know, it happens, but still, it's not a great look. Pioshik got out-jungled by Peanut. Even though he had a pretty good series, he was probably the best player here on DRX. Zika was fine in the mid lane. He picked Seraphine, and he actually beat Chovy in lane in game 1. Was just kind of the better player in game 1, but kind of got beat pretty hard in game 2. And then King and, like I said, King and Nidoran, like, whatever. DRX just, they didn't have it. They were close, but they didn't have it. Not the worst loss of all time for them. I still think outlook-wise that they're still the top 3 to 4 team in the LCK. This doesn't change too much for me, even though it's an 0-2. I still think they looked fine. As for Gen.G, they should win this, and it's a good bounce back. This reinstills some confidence if you lost any from the T1 series, but I didn't lose too much at the beginning of there, right? Like, losing your T1's not a big deal. Beating DRX is a big deal, and it's good, and I'm happy, and both of these teams kind of looked exactly as I expected. That's going to bring us to our final series here of Week 4 LCK action, and it was a fun one. T1 taking on Fredit BRION, and T1 crushes them, predictably. It's the best team in the league versus the worst team in the league, but they don't just beat them. They bully them. They pick this comp, and I'm sure you've seen it. Like, you don't need to look at the screen to know what I'm talking about. Yone, Diana, Yasuo, Senna, Lee Sin. This is the funniest comp I've ever seen, and I'm very happy it was picked, but this is cyberbullying. Like, this is unfair. This is T1 saying, we are so much better than you, Fredit BRION, that we're just gonna have fun. Like, we're not even taking this game seriously, and they still completely obliterated them. Zeus is gonna be my player of the series. That Yone game in game 2 was disgusting. Wasn't the only great game, but, you know, it was probably the scariest. That's one of the scariest games of anybody playing anything all year that I've seen, was that Yone was attempting to kill that Yone. Faker played really well in game 1. Probably one of his better series of the year, but again, it's against Fredit BRION and a really struggling Lava, so what do I know? Shout out Faker, though. He had a really good LeBlanc game. He got to play his signature champ, so good for him. Owner's still really good. Gumayushi, unfortunately, had to take the backseat by playing Senna in game 2. Sucks for him, but, you know, you do what you gotta do. And then Keria. Keria, is it fair to say that Keria is one of the better Lee Sins that we've watched in the world this year? Because that game was actually really, really disgusting to have to watch. He played really well. Like, not just like, oh, you know, he played well for support on Lee Sin. He was really good, and his kicks were awesome, and he was everywhere on the map, and shout out. Like, this was just a really good game. It was between him and Zeus for player of the series for me, but Zeus just had that Yone game was really, really ridiculous. But I can't believe this won. I avoided solo queue for quite a few days because of this. Hopefully it's gone now. But yeah, this sucked. Like, it's awesome to watch, but it sucked that it happened. If you're Fredit BRION, you gotta feel disrespected, but at this point, what do you even say about them? Like, they're the worst team in the LCK. They can't win even if they want to. Gamin was in at AD carry again. He played fine. Much better than he did in that first game earlier in the week, but not like they were ever going to compete with T1. Sword is going to be my dud of the series here. Just completely destroyed in that game 2 on the Gnar. He didn't have a good game 1 on the Sedge either. I don't know. Just not a good look from Bro. Overall, you could have given this to pretty much anybody. Honestly, this was a team gap. So, not really anybody particular on Fredit BRION that had a bad series. More so just T1 was the better team. They didn't really... Bro didn't make a ton of mistakes. T1 just beat them. Like, they were just everywhere. So, shout out T1. Outlooks of these teams. Bro's the worst team in the league. T1's the best team in the league. I really have nothing else to say. I don't want this segment to go on too long because, honestly, what do you really need to talk about other than the fact that they picked Yone, Diana, Yasuo, Senna, Lee Sin? That's hilarious. I hope they do it again, and I hope they do it against a good team, because, I mean, if they can win against, I don't know, like, even like a Kwangdong Freecs with something like this, that would be so, so funny. So, yeah, shout out to T1 for picking this. This will live in my head rent-free. All right, that is going to do it for my Week 4 LCK overview and analysis of all 5 days. Up on the screen right now, you're going to see the current LCK standings 1 to 10 with their record on the screen. You will also see a little power ranking category next to it, a little column. That's where I personally power rank all the teams from 1 to 10 with how that has changed from last week directly next to that. Not a lot of change this week. In fact, only one change. DRX is going to be jumping DK after beating them from 4 to 3. They're basically the same team. If you want to keep DRX at 4 and you want to have DAMWON at 3, sure. If you want to put DRX at 3 because they won and DAMWON at 4, sure. They're the same team. I thought DRX looked fine, I guess, against Gen.G. DK just looks a little bit more inconsistent to me. I'm worried more about that bot lane than I am about anything on DRX. I guess outside of Kingen, but Kingen doesn't really matter for this team. Like, they win in spite of him anyways, so I don't know. Yeah, I feel more comfortable saying DRX than I do DAMWON right now, but it's not by a lot. Nothing else changed. I had it pretty spot on last week, having Nongshim down at 8 and KDF and KT, like, right battling out for that 6-7 spot. So, yeah, nothing else changes there. So, not actually a lot of changes in the power rankings this week. As for my player of the week, it is going to go to Prince on Liiv SANDBOX. He has been phenomenal. I've talked about it all video long last week, too, how good he has been. This was a very close one between him and Zeus on T1, but Prince is going to be my player of the week for Week 4 here. Zeus did win it in Week 2 for me, so maybe going into it a little bit that I just didn't want to give Zeus 2, and they were pretty equal in terms of output this week and how important they were. Prince might have actually just been a little bit better, but it's close. My dud of the week for me is pretty easy. It's Samd here on Hanwha Life. He has pretty clearly been one of the worst AD carries in the region ever since coming over, and he certainly did not have a good one this week. Him and Hanwha are both struggling quite a bit. So yeah, my dud of the week here is going to Samd on Hanwha Life, and my player of the week is going to Prince on Liiv SANDBOX. So that is going to do it. If you guys enjoyed, let me know that down in the comment section below, and of course, if you liked it, please leave a like. It really does help the channel out a lot. You guys know that by now. And there's really only one thing left to say, and that is I hope you are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.